Hello, we're going to get started shortly, so please hold tight. Thank you for joining.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first Oregon Wine Industry Labor and Salary Survey. We're very excited to release this data, which was collected in 2017 through the Oregon Wine Board sponsorship and our collaborator, Linfield College. There we go. Sorry, technical difficulties. So you all know who I am, Bree Boskov. I'm a Master of Wine. I'm the Education Director here at the Oregon Wine Board. The webinar here, we're going to keep all of our attendees on mute for now. You can ask questions throughout the salary survey as Jeff presents, and I can moderate these questions to him directly if they are relevant. There will also be time at the end of the presentation for Q&A, so please stay on board and send your questions through at the end if anything arises. We will be recording this presentation, and it will be available at the Oregon Industry website at industry.oregonwine.org. Following up, we'll have an email coming out to the industry which will link to this webinar recording and the PDF presentation and the next steps going forward in this salary survey process. So our agenda for today, we're going to cover the overview of the 2017 Oregon Wine Industry Salary Survey, give you a little bit about the background and objectives of the survey findings. Jeff will present on the findings, explaining the methodology, give context to the data and the results, and how to think about cost of living allowances coming into the equation also. He will also be on hand to answer questions at the end of the session as well. So to give you some background into this salary survey, it came about through the Business Education Committee discussions in 2017. It was identified by many of our industry leaders that the Wine Business Monthly salary survey that is conducted as a national project has very low representation for Oregon producers, and we needed something for our industry leaders and our employees in the industry to be currently relevant and more increasingly focused on our very dynamic and growing industry. So as our producers increase and our production increases across not only the Willamette Valley, but all of our other regions across the state, we have a demand for increased skilled wine industry employees. We need to be able to identify those and identify how these employees can be retained in successful positions. In order to remain competitive, the salaries offered must be compared to similar business models and sizes within our own industry, not the national or California industry, which is what is represented primarily by the Wine Business Monthly salary survey. The access to data from an Oregon-specific survey has huge benefits to both employers and employees alike for building the success of our industry. So the study designed for comparison and reference purposes, the Oregon Salary Survey follows the format of the Wine Business Monthly Survey with inputs tailored specifically to Oregon counties and regions. Our research partner was selected as Linfield College has a liberal arts focus and is housed in Oregon's largest wine producing region. It was identified as the most suitable confidential third-party partner. Going forward in next steps for our industry, this is just the beginning of the survey, salary survey structure. We would like to expand on this survey process and include benchmarking in the future. For now, 2017, we had a great response, but we need more data and more nuanced data in order to have a greater understanding of our unique employment landscape and how we can continue to build that for success for our producers going forward. So we will be pleading with you throughout the year at the end of 2018 in the fall to again submit and fill out the survey, the salary survey, and we ask that you do this and that you send it out to other people within your industry group to make sure that we're getting a true comparison of all industry producers from all sizes. I will now introduce Jeff Peterson, who really needs no introductions, sociology professor and director of Northwest Studies at Linfield College. And he has very huge experience in this field and absolutely loved taking on this challenge of surveying the industry. So Jeff, over to you.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody, and I'm looking forward to going through the results that we found from this first survey that we did for 2017. Just to lay out a few things that we did. First, I think Bree went over most of the purpose and methodology of the survey. What we usually do then is give you sort of the basic demographics. In other words, who was it among you that took the survey? And then I'll provide some basic salary information, which is the information that most closely corresponds to what Wine Business Monthly does, but at the Oregon level. And then we'll do some information on salary by the number of cases produced so that we get a little bit of information about salaries by size of the wineries and also a little bit by region, although that data is a little bit more difficult as we get into smaller areas. We did ask a few gender questions in the survey. If you took it, you'll remember that. And then also just give you a little bit of information on how to look at some standard of living adjustments that you might want to look at, and maybe a tool at the end that will give you another way of evaluating how much you feel you can or should be paying someone, and then we'll have some conclusions at the end. So the purpose was to provide data for the Oregon wine industry, and as Bree mentioned, to mirror the Wine Business Monthly salary survey to some degree. We actually tried to have a small group that would ask these kind of questions so that we could look at other types of pertinent data for you all that really broke it down more along the lines of the regions of Oregon, but also in terms of the number of cases and that sort of thing. And we actually went a little bit deeper into the different types of positions that are there. And then we also want to help you in being able to extrapolate from there what the benchmarks are. In other words, we really can't get to every single position that is available in the Oregon wine industry. One of the things to remember is that, as you will see, and as you know, we have a lot of small wineries and we have a few, larger ones. But it's to try and do a survey that includes people that only have vineyards or people that only have wineries or have a winery and a tasting room, and some people don't have tasting rooms. You really have to kind of keep it to be down to a pretty simple survey. So what we did in the fall of 2017 was we designed, with the input of some industry members, we had a small committee of what we would call sort of small, medium, and large for Oregon producers to get together and talk about what we wanted on the survey. And then we pre-tested it and had some people who had vineyards and some people who had wineries and people who had tasting rooms try it out and see how well it fit what they needed. And then we even pared that down after that. And then, as you probably know, because you were hounded a lot by different people, we sent the link out via SurveyMonkey through the Oregon Wine Board and to other venues to ask people to take it. And we actually did a little bit of a presentation also at the symposium, where we also begged for more respondents and got a few more. So in the end, we got about 188 respondents, which on the one hand is a good number. But as you will see, one of the things that happens when you start doing tables where you have 3 regions, but then you have 4 or 5 different levels of possible responses for the number of cases that are produced, those cells get pretty small, and you wind up having issues in terms of the actual number of responses. And so we'll talk more about that. But one of the things also to remember when you look at the tables is that there were a lot of filters so that we weren't wasting people's time in terms of having to ask for, you know, if they didn't have a tasting room, we didn't want people to have to answer all of the tasting room questions. So while the total was 188 respondents for people who started the survey, what you will find is that there are a wide variations. You'll have only 90 people, for example, who answer questions on vineyards, et cetera. And so that's one of the reasons why you see that the numbers of respondents vary throughout the entire survey and the tables that I'll provide today. And then in sociology and survey research, we say we then clean the data. And this is where there were a few outliers that were sort of obviously not, people maybe didn't understand the instructions, and that we have to take those out, and really we just code that as missing data, since I can't guess as to what the person meant when they put in a 12 and we were asking for thousands of dollars, right? So that's another reason why, and there weren't very many of those, but there were, you know, 2 or 3 cases where that had to be done. And that will give us the final total. So all of it is based on the final totals of people who actually responded to those questions and who did it in a way that we are absolutely certain was a valid response. One of the things I also want to remind you is that there are a number of places where the number of data points is very low, and you need to be careful with that information, where you get 4 or 5, or in some cases 1 respondent in the cell. And in those cases, obviously, when you look at an average of 5, that's different than looking at an average of, say, 47 respondents. And so one of the things that you need to do as you're doing this is kind of remember that probably the most reliable information is the Oregon-wide data. And then you probably need to be a little bit cautious here and there, depending upon the number of respondents in the cell. If we had, you know, 400 or 500 people respond, we probably would not have had that issue, but that's not, you know, what happened. And so that's what you do then, is just kind of be careful with that information. You can also, so you can look at the overall averages. You can also, at the end, we'll look at the cost of living adjustment website. And that's one of the things that you can also look at, is maybe you have only a few data points, but then you can see what it would mean to have someone move from, say, Sonoma to Eastern Oregon or Southern Oregon, where we have fewer data points, and see if you think you're in the ballpark. Another thing that we did for some of the tables is we provided, almost all of the data has the mean or average salary, but we also, in some cases, provided median salary. And that is just another measure of what we call central tendency, which is the point at which half of the respondents fall below a given line and half fall above it. And this gives you another way of just kind of figuring out, you know, the average is kind of the average across everyone. The median also gives you another way of looking at, you know, what most people are doing and how comfortable you feel paying at a certain level if you're able to do that. So let's get to the data and talk about that. The basic demographic information, in other words, what we have, moving that. The types of producers is, hang on, we're trying to get something moved here so I can actually see one of the tables. So on the left-hand side there, what you see is is the number of people who responded that they had a tasting room. And so we got a lot of data. 155 respondents said yes, they have a tasting room. 92 people said they had a winery, and 98 had a vineyard. And that just gives you an idea of kind of what's out there in terms of the respondents, in terms of the producers. Here is the basic information on the right-hand side. There is then total number of cases produced. And One of the things you'll notice is, again, as most of you know, is nearly half of the respondents in this case are 5,000 cases, make 5,000 cases or less of wine. So that means that we are very different from other places like Napa and the database that the Wine Business Monthly provides. This means that when you get into, as we'll see in a little bit, when you get into the larger, the types of positions that you're going to see in larger wineries and vineyards, we're going to have a lot fewer respondents. For example, having national sales directors, those sorts of things. Those are positions that you're just going to have fewer of because our individual producers tend to be smaller. And then it's 18.9% there are 20,000 cases and above. So that includes everyone in sort of what would be considered still very, very small in some regions like Napa to what might be, medium or medium small. So you've got 17 respondents for that. Another part of just to give you a basic, some basic information here, we had 78 respondents from the Willamette Valley, so it's about 86% of the respondents were Willamette Valley. We had about 10% of our respondents, or 9, from Southern Oregon, and then 3 respondents from the Columbia Valley. So as you can see, very shortly, we will get into some real restrictions there on how much you can assume from the other regions, such as Columbia Valley and Southern Oregon, and probably a little bit more confidence in the Willamette Valley information. And then here's the information from vineyard by county. We wanted to also just ask the question of in what county were vineyards, and so 44% are in Yamhill County. You've got over nearly 60% are either in Yamhill and Polk County, and then you can see for yourself the information there that as you get further away from those two areas, it's less and less. Jackson County has nearly 10%, and that gives you. And again, this is out of 92 respondents. So this is the number of people who responded that they had a vineyard. This is the percentage for that. So let's get to some of the positions here. This gives you, for sort of the executive salaries, the GM or president, and that's the way it's put generally in the Wine Business Monthly. Your Oregon average salary is $91,000. The median salary, however, is $70,000. So that gives you an idea that we've actually got 50% of the people fall below 70. So we've got it probably there. What you see is a few people with director and GM or president that are sort of skewing that up. So half of the people are paying $70,000 or less and half above. National sales director average is about $89,000, but then the median salary is $75,000. Again, 50%, that's the 50% point, half falling below and half falling above that. Director of marketing, $71,000 and $68,000. So those suggest right there that you've got the average is pretty similar across the board, and that measure of central tendency for those. The next few actually are actually fairly close to being the same. Controller, director of finance, $77,000, $75,000. So it's really those first two that you see up at the top, the GM or president, the director, national sales director, that probably are a little bit more skewed with some people being able to pay quite a bit more at that top level, but that the average is really, but that most people can pay is probably not that high. And so with the ones below that, you see regional sales director, $64,000 average salary, and the median is $60,000. Those are not all that far. And then with HR director, you actually see that's the only one that has the opposite trend, with $66,000 being the average and the median being $68,000. So that means that there are a few more people able to pay their HR director if they're able to do that. So that's also a pretty small sample size, though. You've only got 10 people that have those. So there's probably a little bit more variation there. Let's see, let me move that backwards. Tasting room and direct-to-consumer sales. Again, here one of the things you see is the average salary for direct-to-consumer sales manager is $55,000. The median is $57,000. Wine club manager, $44,000 and $44,000. So that's pretty standard, and you've got a pretty good. I think that's a pretty good group there. 23 respondents for wine club manager if you have one. Tasting room manager. I think that's the position that just about everyone has to have. And so there you've got also a real similarity between the Oregon average salary and the median. Special events manager, again, a smaller number. And then the entry level for tasting room staff is pretty spot on there, 32 total reported. That's the second highest after having a tasting room manager. And there you have an average salary of $28,000, but then the median is $30,000. So half of the people fall below that and half above. For winemaker and vineyard average positions, executive winemaker, we had 49 total reported with an average salary of $73,000. And I think one of the things that you see in this table is a pretty good representation that the average salary and the Oregon median salaries are both pretty solid there. As two measures of central tendency, they're fairly close together, and we tend to like to see that because it means that we don't have people skewing data, either a lot of people way at the top paying a lot more and skewing the data, or people at the bottom. So I think this is one of the ones where even down at labor crew supervisor, when we only have 12 reported, I would say I feel pretty comfortable with the fact that those average salaries and the medians are pretty reliable for the respondents in this survey. And I think that gives you an idea of 3 positions in the winery itself, and then 3 out in the vineyard in terms of what people expect to be able to pay at this point in time. And I think that's pretty reliable data there. We also asked a few questions for hourly wage, and again, had pretty good data reported. If you think of the types of positions that you pretty much have to have, all the way down to maybe a little bit more, where if you have unskilled tractor operators, that may be something that the vineyard owner may be able to do him or herself. And so it's not a surprise that you see sort of a drop as you get down there. Part-time tasting room, we had a low of $10 an hour to a high of $20 an hour being paid, with an average hourly wage of across the board of $13 an hour. Cellar hand and interns, low of 11, high of 20, and average of 14. And skilled tractor operators, 13 to 24, with an average of 16. And then unskilled was 10, low, 16, high for the range, and then an average hourly wage of 13. And again, you would kind of expect to see that sort of a drop off in terms of what, given that we're a small industry in terms of production size, individual production size, you would expect some of those positions to be done by the vineyard owners themselves oftentimes. So one of the things that people have been curious about, and some of the emails I've gotten is, by cases, what are some of the salaries in terms of variability by cases, so by vineyard size itself. So tasting room manager, you see a progression there from fewer than 2,500 cases, about 37,000. There's working its way pretty well up to 46,000, but again, that average of 41,000. There's not a huge variation there. There's a dip from 5,000 to 10,000 cases, and that's probably just the nature of who responded to this survey. I'm not sure I can explain why there's that much of a dip, but it's still fairly close to that $41,000 average for tasting room managers. But a culturalist or vineyard manager, again, see a pretty good progression there from fewer than 2,500 cases. You see about $48,000 all the way up to 20,000 plus 62,000, and a fairly stable progression up there. Once you get into 10,000, they're making about 50,000, about 56,000. Again, you know, I feel more comfortable with the overall average salary of 54,000 than I do when you've got, for example, at 10,000 to 20,000, you've only got 4 respondents in there. So you have to sort of kind of keep that in mind, that with more respondents, we might have felt a little bit more confident about that. But I think the average, when you have a total of 33 respondents, isn't bad. Executive winemaker, this is one that a lot of people were curious about, and there's quite a variety. As you see, you start with 2,500 cases or less, and you've got people making about 58,000, and then to 20,000 cases or more, 107,000. So nearly double, not quite double the amount, and so you see quite a variation there in terms of what people are able to pay. And really, in this case, I'd also point out the big jump from, if you're making less than 20,000, which is you're making 71,000, to then the 15 cases that are making 20,000 or more. That's kind of where the jump happens, is from 20,000 or less to 20,000 and up. And then the average is $74,000 for across the board, which is on those first tables anyway. General manager, president. Again, you see quite a progression here. Obviously, at the lower ranks, you're only going to see, in fewer than 2,500 cases, we had, I think, 2 people that would give themselves the rank or title of general manager, president. They're probably more the winemaker, maybe. But you see quite a progression there, all the way up to 20,000 cases being 133,000. And again, I would say the big thing that jumps out at me there is the jump from 20,000 or less is, 10,000 to 20,000 is $83,000, and then 20,000 and up is 133. So there's a jump of, you're looking at a jump of $50,000 a year there, and that's where maybe the payoff happens in terms of production level. Otherwise, there's a pretty natural progression there that you would see in terms of case size. National Sales Director, this is one of those cases where, I suggested you've got some issues simply because you have to be a certain size of a winery to actually have a National Sales Director, most likely. And so this is, and we had no respondents for under 2,500. So that's not included on that table. No one has a National Sales Director if you make fewer than 2,500 cases. And again, quite a progression there because of the small sample size. That 5,000 to 10,000 cases seems across the board in a number of tables to have a lower, to be kind of where the dip happens. And then the jump happens between 20,000 and under, and 20,000 and up. We did ask some questions. The group that I was working with was curious, and so was I, about the sort of the sex or gender split in certain positions. We decided not to ask for every single position, but we were curious about what happens, what is going on in the wine industry in terms of gender equity questions, those sorts of things. So you do see in the presidential general manager and the director and national sales director, there's a fairly even split there. 59% of the people who responded to this survey had a male president or general manager. 54% were male, director, national sales. So for president, it was, or general manager, female was 41%, and director of national sales, 43%. Then executive winemaker, and for the respondents, we had 61 respondents for winemaker, and that was quite skewed, 82%. I'm curious as to what we would find if we were able to get data from everyone, but that shows that, at least for this response, this survey, it's still a pretty male-dominated category. Tasting room manager swings the other way, 64% female, 35% male out of 82 respondents. And then viticulturist swings the other way, with 80% of the vineyard managers or viticulturists being male and 19%, roughly 20%, being female. So that's just an interesting snapshot in terms of what you find for sex or gender according to those positions. We also wanted, we had some people who were very curious about the regions, and this is one of the places where I would, just sort of caution about, especially when you're looking at positions in Southern Oregon and the Columbia Valley. In many cases, we only have one response, so that's, that's kind of all you have, and so you need to sort of make your own decisions if you're in one of those regions on what you want to do with that information. It's possible, like I said, to maybe look at cost of living and compare that and see how close that comes to the reported average for only 4 people in Southern Oregon, for example. But then what you see is, I provide the mean salaries off there to the side so you can then see what those are. Not applicable just means that we didn't have any responses. So that's, we didn't have any of the people who did respond, did not, in Southern Oregon or Columbia Valley, did not report having a consumer sales manager and didn't answer that.
Jeff, is there data on pay by gender positions?
I can do that. It's going to be similar in terms of what you can do with that, but we can actually ask that. I can actually come up with that table. Let's see, sales and executive by AVA region, similar. I'm pretty confident of in Willamette Valley, for example, with the data that we get. Although, again, when you start breaking it out for general manager or president, one of the things that you see is that you do see that there's a variation there. Because HR directors, for example, there aren't a lot in the first place, and then almost all of them are in the Willamette Valley. So you do see that kind of a breakdown, and that's where I would probably use a cost of living calculator to help me figure out what I felt comfortable with in that area. Winery positions and vineyard positions. We've got, I think, some pretty good data here. $54,000 for the Willamette Valley, pretty much across the board, even though the other two have lower response rates. They come in pretty close to what the average is. I look down to executive winemaker. There's, I'm not sure what I would do with the Columbia Valley. There's 2 respondents there, and it's probably someone paying themselves what they can. And so obviously when you have 47 responses over in the Willamette Valley, I would feel more comfortable with the executive winemaker level and the assistant winemaker levels than I would with skewing off to the right there. Although I think Southern Oregon, when you get into 4 and 5, that that's probably a little bit helpful to you guys for that. So one of the things that we also wanted to do, we had someone who was talking about the fact that people were bringing the wine business monthly data set into contract negotiations and expecting to be paid that. And that's a really tough one because, as I mentioned here on this slide, even if we use the subset that Wine Business Monthly have of 50,000 cases or less, which is the lowest they can break it down, the average for a national sales director in that database is $144,000, $184,000, as compared to the Oregon average of $89,000. And so you know, I think that's kind of one of the issues there, is that you're not going to be able to, that, you know, trying to negotiate between 184,000 versus 89,000 is probably a non-starter for a lot of people in the Oregon wine industry. And so when we only have 50% of our respondents producing under 5,000 cases, and over 80% produce 20,000 cases or less, you're just dealing with the whole different ballpark in terms of the salaries that you can and I guess should pay here. So one of the tools that you can use is a cost of living calculator, of which there are many. One of the ones that I've actually used is Sperling's, and Sperling's, one of the reasons I use that one is because when you go to type in, say you want to look at the difference between, you know, Sonoma or Sonoma County and Portland or Mcminnville, some of the calculators will give you the same cost of living for Mcminnville as it is in Portland. And I think most of us know that it's very different living in Mcminnville or Yamhill County versus living in Portland. So you need to sort of pay attention to that if you use one, and make sure that it actually drills down to Mcminnville, or you may just have to use that region. But that means that you really are talking about, oftentimes, about data that is being provided at the Portland level, not down to the Mcminnville level, for example, or Newburgh and that sort of thing. So one of the cost of living indicators that I feel does a pretty good job of drilling down to showing those differences is Sperling's. And Sperling's actually will show you the difference of the cost of living between Mcminnville and Portland. So if you go to that cost of living calculator, the cost of living index of Mcminnville is 116, which means that what they do is they take the average cost of living for the entire United States and they set it at 100. And then what they do is help you figure out how much above that average or below that average. So you could go to some places that the cost of living index might be 86, which means that it's cheaper, much cheaper to live there than the U.S. average of 100. So the cost of living is set at averages at 100, which means Mcminnville is a bit more expensive to live in than the U.S. average. But the cost of living for Portland is more expensive than that. And then if you look at the cost of living in Sonoma, California, which is one of the places we've talked about, that's 194, which means that Sonoma County, or Sonoma specifically, is 66.3% more expensive than Mcminnville overall, and 33% more expensive than Portland. So what you can do is you can actually go into the cost of living indicator or calculator and sort of show, just enter in a salary. One of the things I did was I just showed, for example, a person making $125,000 in Sonoma could have the same standard of living in Mcminnville at roughly $75,000. So you actually just type that number in. You can mess with some of the assumptions, but that's sort of a rough guesstimate. And then for Portland, it would be more.
A publicly available database. It's not a subscription model.
It's not. In fact, there's a link on here.
If they wanted to see Medford or they wanted to see Hood River, they could use that perhaps.
Mm-hmm. So here's what that looks like. So I gave you the link. The link is there, and it's called bestplaces.net, and it just shows you the cost of living, and you just literally put in where you live now, where are you considering moving, and what your annual income is. And so you can, let's see if we do, pick a place. Where do we want to?
Here in Oregon?
Say someone is coming from somewhere else, where we're recruiting.
Santa Barbara.
Santa Barbara. I think it's really good right now. And we want to come to, should we do Portland or Mcminnville? Medford. And if you're in Santa Barbara, say you're making 60,000. Then you just submit, and it would tell you all you'd have to, if you're making 60,000 in Santa Barbara, all you need to do is make 25,000 in Medford, and you're in high cotton. So you're doing really well. So
Okay, I didn't mean to distract you. I just want to give them a tool.
but if you do, yeah, and I've got the link for that in here.
That's great.
So for example, if you did, say you're in Santa Barbara and you're actually making more like 120,000.
Didn't leave.
So yeah. Used to those maps.
Mm-hmm.
And you're making 120,000 in Medford. They make that decision on how comfortable you are. And one of the things that also shows there is, you know, like what the average median home costs. So one of the reasons why there's a huge drop is the median home cost in Santa Barbara is $1 million. So half of the homes are worth more than that and half less. And the average house in Medford is $225,000, or the median is. So you have to sort of be aware of, you know, transportation costs are fairly equal, healthcare costs, miscellaneous, et cetera. Housing, though, is the big one. So that's where you've got kind of a got to pay attention in terms of what you're hoping to get. Yeah.
So this just gives people a tool of responding to the person who brings in the Wine Business Monthly, and also equivalizing their job offers when they're recruiting somebody. Allows the employer to be more informed.
Okay, trying to get back to our original screen here. These down here. That was cost of
Is that what
living.
you wanted to do?
Well, we were on that. We need to get back to the webinar. There we go. Thank you. So, and that's basically the last slide except for this one, which is one of the things you do is reread the assumptions at the beginning of the presentation. And, you know, again, we're trying to gather data for an industry that has a very wide range. So trying to make sure that we get information at all these levels is something that we were trying to do. And also just, I would be careful with some of the data where you have like smaller reports. So you can kind of use the averages and medians. And I would really look at this as sort of one tool that you can use in addition to others such as the cost of living calculator, so that can kind of give you that idea of sort of cross-referencing a little bit to decide what you are able to do. And I can definitely get some information on gender pay. We're trying not to, at this point, we're trying to do the very basic information, and I can see if that's helpful to you guys. And that's about it, if there are any questions.
Okay, it doesn't appear that there are any questions out there at the moment. Tom, did you have any insight?
I was just gonna say, we should maybe just tell people when this will be visible to people who want to review it, or.
Yeah, so we will extract the table that has been requested, and we will add that into the slideshow, and then the entire webinar recording should be available on our industry site by the end of the week. So that's industry.oregonwine.org, and it will be available there. We will send out an email to everyone who signed up for this webinar to let them know that the webinar is now available online, and the PowerPoint information also. Going forward, as we mentioned, or as we have mentioned a couple of times, we really do require more data set collection. So when we roll out the 2018 survey, which will be in the fall, we will be asking you to, speak with your industry colleagues and really encourage everyone to fill out the survey so that we can have a true representation of our industry. We will also be showing the results of the 2018 survey at the 2019 Oregon Wine Symposium, and hopefully, if the data is robust enough, we can also then start discussing possible benchmarking tools for retaining skilled employees and loyalty bonuses and things like that. So this will be part of the symposium going forward. It's very important to our industry right now, and we thank you all for your participation in the survey and for your interest. And if you have any questions, please send them through or reach out to us individually. My email address is Bree, B-R-E-E, @oregonwine.org, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions or take any suggestions going forward on how we structure this salary survey. And you can also reach Jeff at Linfield as well.
Yes. My email is jd as a dog, Peters @linfield.edu. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your participation. I appreciate it.